years ago, I started a ministry called Zurich Publishing. And so what we do on the side, and the construction company supports the publishing work, because you can't make any money off of theological works or historical works. So what we do in Zurich Publishing is we bring back some of the reformers that are forgotten. We did a whole book, a biography on Pierre Viret, which was Calvin's closest associate out of Lausanne. And so then we do theological works. We translate books from French into English, and so forth. So I've had an interest in the Reformation. I'm former Catholic, so the Reformation has some personal meaning to me. And I read D'Aubigné for years ago, and then when you get older, you got to start focusing on one particular subject, right? Because I think we're running out of time. I think I've sensed that. I don't know if any of you do. And so I've concentrated my studies on the Swiss Reformation. And I've been there. I'm not a historian, because I can't speak French and German, which you have to be able to do in order to be a historian in the Swiss concerning the Reformation. But I've been to many of the sites that you're going to see here today, and talked to a lot of people over there. So before I get started, today what I want to do is about 5 minutes to finish up on Zwingli, the founder of the Reformed faith. I ran out of time last time. And then I'm going to do 35 minutes on Heinrich Bullinger, who took over the church from Zwingli, another unknown figure in the Reform realm. But let me ask a question here first, and this is really critical in our study on the Reformation, is why do we bother with history? Why do we bother with the study of history? Why is it important? So typically you get the normal answers to that question, which are good answers. We study history so we can learn from it, so we don't have to repeat the mistakes. Then we study history because it should inspire us, which it really does. The stories inspire us. But let me give you another word to think about studying history, and that's the word of legacy. So usually legacy is tied to family legacy. So, and I don't know, for me, my grandparents came from Austria and Italy, so I have an interest in who am I? Where did I come from? What was their life like? And some of you may have sixth-generation Southerners, and you hear the stories. So when you hear the stories of family legacy, you feel almost an obligation. You've got to continue what somebody else gave you and somebody else started. So I say this morning, what's more important, family legacy or our religious legacy? And it's obviously our religious legacy is more important than a family, especially how important family is. So we have to ask the question, where did we come from? Who are we? Who gave us our faith? And what did they go through to give us our faith? And with that, you end up kind of overwhelmed with a sense of responsibility that I've got to continue this. I said last time, our church history does not go back to Billy Graham's 1949 Los Angeles crusade. It's a little deeper than that, right? So, a little ding at the Baptist there, sorry. We have to ask this question. Somebody wrote this, I thought it was excellent. He said, legacy in the religious realm is a responsibility to maintain a continuum of faith from the past to the present to the future. So this is why we really have to, this is so important to study our church history. And for us as Protestants, we have to go back to our beginnings, which is the Swiss Reformation. So last time I was here, I ran out of time, so I'm going to do 5 minutes on Zwingli, and then maybe another 35 minutes on his successor, Heinrich Bullinger. Now, I did the screen up there a little different than last time, and I put on the board there as a subtitle, to keep the memories alive. And where that comes from, 2 weeks before Calvin passed, he sent a letter to his mentor, William Farel in Neuchâtel, and here's what he said in the letter. He said, "May God bless you, most worthy and very dear brother." This is Calvin to Farel. "Since it's God's will that you should outlive me, keep alive the memory of our fellowship in the work which has been profitable for the church of God and the fruit of which awaits us in heaven." So on the board is my honoring of John Calvin and putting his words on there is what we do at Zurich Publishing. We want to keep the memories alive. it's interesting. These are the 26 canton flags of Zurich today. So my favorite in there is, they're beautiful flags. If you go and visit Switzerland, you see them all over the place. My favorite is Bern, on the top row with the bear, and at the very bottom is Geneva, which is the old bishop's flag, the imperial flag, and the keys to the kingdom. It's a Catholic flag, but it looks so good they kept it. Okay, so here we have the map of Switzerland, which is the current 26 canton map. So what's interesting, if you look at the far left, you see the little Republic of Geneva, which joined the Confederation in 1815, very, very late, and there's reasons for that. We can do another study on that another day. Very independent people in Geneva. Then you have Bern in the middle, which is the most important canton, which is where the capital is today. And then way up on the top left in that, I think, pink, is Zurich. So, and this is the beginning of our Reformed faith happened in Zurich. But Bern is very important because the Lords of Bern supported the work of the Reformation. So what you're going to find in the Reformation study is the magistrates were Christian, were intimately involved with the reformers to promote the Protestant faith. In Geneva, the reason Calvin has such a struggle is the magistrates were very resistant early on until later, till the development through laymen, and that's another study in itself. So the last session we did, let me scoot over here. Okay, so this is Ulrich Zwingli. You can see the years and his birth and death. So Zwingli is the founder, we talked about last time, of the Reformed faith. Like Luther, he was a man made for the battle. His personality and his character. He was very aggressively pushed the Protestant agenda in Zurich, and he brought the Protestant faith to Zurich and beyond in most of Switzerland. So he's responsible for giving the foundation for the rest of the cantons to become Protestant. So, and then here is the church that both he, the Great Minster, Grossmünster in German, the two towers are things that were rebuilt because the other towers had perished in a fire, I think somewhere in the 1800s. So that's the great church on the Lamont River. And then, so let's get into Zwingli. I really want to just touch briefly on his death. So he had a premature, unfortunate death in October of 1531. So what we had at this time is I should have had it up there, but the forest, well, let me go back. Let me see. Okay, in the middle, you see Schweitz, Lucerne, Zug, Uri, and Unterwalden. Those are the forest cantons. Forest cantons because they were in the mountains, right? They were in the Alps. So those cantons relied economically and for the subsistence on the cantons that had more arable land for food and salt and wine and things like that. So Zwingli, which was an unfortunate thing, with the Bernese lords and with the council from Zurich, they wanted to fulfill Zwingli's vision of being able to send Protestant ministers into the forest cantons in the 5 very strict Catholic cantons, and they wouldn't let him in. They just wouldn't let him in. And so Zwingli and the two councils devised a thought of putting an embargo on the forest, on food and grain and things going into the forest cantons from Zurich and from the other parts of Switzerland. And this was really, we have to be honest in our history, it's a very stupid move. So they put an embargo on it, and then they said, I think it was salt went up twice, grain went up 4 times, and wine went up twice, doubled. And so the forest cantons threatened war. So you have, when the war was threatened, and people, they couldn't survive. So Zwingli, out of his effort, out of his good intentions to bring the gospel into the southern cantons, they did this embargo theory. So the forest cantons met at Kappel, on the Second Battle of Kappel it's called, with 7,000 men. The Zurichers were way behind in establishing a war party, and they had only 1,500. Now this is an instance here. This picture is in Zwingli plots. Interesting, the house there on the right is Bullinger's home. Zwingli never lived in there. And then the church is to the left that you can't really see. So this is the last meeting. And what happened in Switzerland at that time, the pastors, the ministers and the councilmen all went into battle. They all had their helmets and their swords and everything. So Zwingli went into battle. And at the Forest Canton saw that they totally outnumbered the Zurichers, and Bern did not come to the plate and bring their massive army. So they were really behind the Zurichers. So late at night on October 31st, the Forest Cantons had a surprise attack on the Zurich positions. Zwingli was wounded in the leg, and let me show you that picture. This is a very accurate picture. So he was wounded in the leg. A mercenary by the name of Wackinger came by. They actually put a light under his face and realized it was Zwingli, the Catholic army. And they realized it was Zwingli. They asked if he wanted a Catholic priest to give his last rites. He said no. And then right before Wackinger put a knife or a sword to him, Zwingli, the history has this, Zwingli said they can kill the body but not the soul. And that was his last words. And then the Catholics did a ritualistic death ceremony on Zwingli. And for treason, they quartered his body, cut his body, 4 parts. They burned his remains in pig entrails and pig blood, and the burning was symbolic of heresy. So this ended up being a huge disaster. This is Zwingli's helmet. I saw the helmet. It's at the train station. There's a National Museum outside the train station in Zurich. The wording on his helmet was something later they put on there. And Zug, the canton, the Forest Cantons had his helmet and his sword for years, and after 2 centuries they gave it back to Zurich. So what happened here? Zwingli's dead, and he's 46, something like that. Listen to this, 25 to 28 Reformed ministers died at this battle, just one evening battle, just a one-day battle. 26 councilmen, 400 Zurichers. The Bern army arrived late. So it ended up being an absolute disaster for Zurich. They sued for peace. They had to do restore money back to the Forest Cantons. So Zurich had to borrow money from a German city. They lost Bremgarten, which is in Aargau, another canton that Bullinger, who we'll talk about, was from. And so it was a disaster. And the Zurichers ended up blaming Zwingli for the war. And out of his good intentions, he wanted to get in there and share the gospel to the Forest Cantons. But you don't use it by force, by an embargo. If you want to share the gospel, just send in Bibles, send in tracts. The Reformation, they used to have a phrase that said, the word of God converts. Just send the scriptures in there. That's all you got to do. So Zurich was in a difficult situation. With the peace, they lost Bremgarten, which is Bullinger's hometown. We'll get into that in a little while. And then they to sue for peace, the Protestant cantons could no longer evangelize in the Catholic cantons. That was part of the peace agreement. So, and Zwingli suffered from his reputation, even in his own canton of Zurich, because he got blamed for the war. It's interesting, when you look at history, I remember as historians say that after the War of Northern Aggression, did I say that correctly? Okay, yeah, I thought so, yeah. The Presbyterians were blamed for the debacle of what happened in the South in Reconstruction after the war. They say after World War II, the Germans blamed the Luftwaffe pilots for not protecting the cities, and many of them had to leave to America and Canada. So the blame for this really is, it's Zwingli. You have to acknowledge it. It is the Council of Zurich, and it's the Lords of Bern. So Zurich, his reputation suffered a lot because of that, because he was blamed for that. So this is interesting. So finally in 1885, the pastor of the Great Minster in Zurich wanted to bring Zwingli's history back to life, so he convinced the council to put a statue up. So this is in front of the Water Church. It's a church that's really built on the water on the Lamont River. It's a really beautiful, beautiful building. So this is interesting, this statue. A Catholic sculpture did it, and his name was, or sculpted, it was Heinrich Natter did it, and he did a really great job, because in Zwingli's right hand, you see the Bible. So symbolic, there's 3 symbolic things here. He brought the Bible back to Switzerland, in his preaching. The other thing is his sword. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. There was objections for the sword being there, but it had to be there because that's just part of Zwingli's life, and that's how he died. What's interesting is they put the statue facing south toward the forest cantons. So symbolic of his vision that one day he wants to evangelize the 5 Catholic cantons. And it hasn't happened yet, but we hope it will one day. So the final thing on Zwingli is there's a lot of first. Zwingli was the founder of the Reformed faith. Zurich was the first Reformed city. The Grossmünster was the first Reformed church. The Carolinum, next to the Grossmünster, was the first Reformed seminary in 1525. And the first Reformed liturgy was at the Grossmünster, and the first Reformed baptism and Lord's Supper was at the Grossmünster. All of this by 1525. So remember the date. By 1536 is when Calvin arrived at Geneva. Okay. And that's the statue there. You can see it a little closer. Very well done. Okay, so the study for today and the time I have remaining is Heinrich Bullinger. So you see the 3 pictures of Bullinger's life. So at the youngest one on the far left there is where he was 27 and took over from the church as Zwingli when Zwingli passed. And this is, obviously, you see the middle years, and then at the end of his life, that's what Zwingli looked like. So he was 27 when he took over the church, and we'll get into that in a little while. Here's 2 books that I've read. The one on the left is Bruce Gordon and Emilio Campi. I met Campi in 2004 in Zurich at the Carolinum at the Theological Seminary. These are the 2 scholars on the Swiss and Zurich Reformation. Then Ellis has a great book on Heinrich Bullinger, and he's German, I think. Now, look at the titles. They call Bullinger the architect of the Reformation and the shepherds of the churches. And this looks like a stretch, but it's not when we go over his history. Those are very accurate titles. So my title was today was Heinrich Bullinger, pastor of the Reformation. Okay, so this is his birthplace. This is Bremgarten. You see the Reuss River in a complete circle, and that's the canton of Aargau where Bullinger was born. It's 15 kilometers west of Zurich. So in this picture, that's the Reuss River, and then it's the downtown area you see by the red roofs. So after the tower there in the middle is the white steeple where his father and Bullinger preached. They both pastored the same church in Bremgarten. I was there in 2004. Okay, his father, and well, let me go to his birthplace here. So this is his birthplace. When I was there in 2004, they had the 500th year anniversary for Bullinger. So they had 12 stations all around Bremgarten. This is the house that he was born in, and I went there, and what was the title of the building now in 2004 was the Hollywood Cafe. You leave America, but America follows you wherever you go. So I went in there, and the girl behind the bar said, "Is this Heinrich Bullinger's birthplace?" I don't know who Bullinger is. So she asked that guy out there. So the gentleman, there's an older one right there on the left, and I said, "Is this Bullinger's birthplace?" And he pointed to the sign. And then I went inside, being the American I am, to see if I could go up there and take pictures of the room. He says, "No, you can't go up there. People live there." I said, all right. You always have to try. So he was born on July 18th in 1504. He was the youngest of 7 children, and he was the prize of his parents. Typically, the youngest is not usually the prize, but in this situation it was. This was his father, Dean Bullinger. He was a Catholic priest. Interesting about him, the Bullingers came from a very wealthy family in Bremgarten, and he actually, as a Catholic priest, married. So they had, in Catholicism, if you have money, you can do certain things. So they had cradle taxes for the priests that had babies. You had to pay a tax, and they let it go. So his father was married. Like I said, they had 7 children. So let me see what here is next. Okay, this is the church. Remember, because of the War of Capelle, the Second Battle, now it's Roman Catholic, and it's very Baroque-ish inside. I took that picture. This is where both Bullingers preached. This is Bullinger. He was a prize student. His parents sent him for 5 years in a Latin school in Bremgarten. Then they sent him to Emmerich, Germany, and this is St. Martin's Church. and he excelled in his studies, and he was a great student. And now here's an interesting thing here. This is St. Martin's Church. This is a Brethren of Common Life church. This was on the Rhine. Across the way was Netherlands. So this is an interesting study. Is Gerhard Grothe started in the late 1300s, the Brethren of Common Life's Latin schools for young boys. So all the reformers, Calvin, Viret, Luther twice, Bullinger, Zwingli, they all went to Brethren of Common Life Latin schools as young boys. These tended to be evangelical. Thomas à Kempis came out of there, and in Rotterdam, Erasmus was trained in Greek at a Brethren Common Life school. So this is very interesting study in itself. So this is where the dad sent him to school in Germany. Then after a few years there, he went to Cologne, which I think the Germans say Köln. And that Cologne, Germany was like, they call it the Rome of Germany. There was Catholic institutions all over the place. They had a bishop there. Obviously, you know, the major cathedral that survived the World War II bombing is still there. And this is interesting because in Cologne, instead of Bullinger losing his faith, he gained his faith. At the time he was there, Erasmus was there. I don't have any accounts where he met Erasmus. And Luther's tracts started coming into Cologne at this time throughout all of Germany. And on his own, because of his reading, he really became a Protestant Christian while he was at the university there. Usually it's the other way around, isn't it, in our day? And so there's a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment in Cologne. And Bullinger stopped going to Mass in 1522. And he says this. He said, when he was in Cologne, he was captive by the Word of God, and he gave up the idea of becoming a monk. Okay. After Cologne, he was called to the Kapelle Abbey, which was in Zurich, southern part of Zurich. Wolfgang Joner was the abbot there, and he was evangelical. So Bullinger was able to teach. Joner gave him permission not to do a Mass. So he was teaching the townspeople and the other monks there because he had the ability to do it. But he did not want to do a Mass because he gave up on all that. At this time when he was there, he attended the Bern both the Zurich and the Bern disputation in 1523 and 58. We talked about that in our first lesson last October. Okay, so what's interesting, while he was here, the monks, Joner was evangelical, and the monks started embracing the Protestant faith. They started marrying. So Joner gave Zwingli sabbatical, and he said, go find a wife. So he went on a campaign, right? He went to the Ottenbach nunnery in Zurich, and it's almost like a Luther experience where there was 2 nuns left, and one of the ones was Anna Alschweiler. Obviously her name was Bullinger. So what's interesting with her is that he met her, he sent a letter of proposal, she sent a letter back, she said yes, and the mother, who just was widowed, did not want her to marry Bullinger. And it just, you had to have the parents' permission back then, and it took 2 years, and they finally married. Now this is interesting about her, and not enough is taught about her. She, when Zwingli died, they moved into, the magistrates put the family into Zwingli's home, and we'll get into that in a minute. And so the house there, they had 11 children. Many of the children died in the plague. She was the perfect pastor's wife. Bullinger used to call her his beloved Hausfrau. Frau is woman, right? Housewife. And in 1553 to 1558, they took in numerous Marian exiles when Bloody Mary took the crown in England. And their house was almost a hotel. It was like a revolving door. I don't even know if they ever had a minute where they just had them and the children there. But this was the ultimate pastor's wife. When she died in the plague before Bullinger died, Ambrose Blauer, in Constance, the reformer there, he told him that the Lord has taken the staff of my old age, my loyal and chosen, exquisitely godly wife. The reformers there in Zurich said, well, you want to remarry? He said, no, I could never replace my Anna. She ended up being called the mother of Zurich. What a great title. see the next slide here. Okay, so this was their first home. This was Zwingli's home. I showed you that when I was here last time. This would have been Zwingli's last home. So they moved into here for, looks like 5 years, and then they moved into this house, which is right across from the door to the Great Minster, the Gross Munster. So that's the Zwingli home, and the Bullinger home, sorry. Okay. Let's see here. So what's interesting here is that after, okay, so this is the last meeting with Zwingli and Bullinger. So they met at Bullinger's home in Bremgarten with the ambassadors from Bern before the Battle of Cappel, the Second Battle of Cappel. And they met, and Zwingli was trying to persuade the Bernese lords to bring their army in to help. And they said, no, we're not going to do it this time. So Bullinger, this was the site. This is when I was there in 2004 of the last meeting between Bullinger and Zwingli. Zwingli was headed down the road back to Zurich, and Bullinger walked with him. And they were just the closest of friends, obviously. Zwingli mentored Bullinger. And so they talked, they embraced, and Bullinger couldn't leave him. They wept, and he had to follow him again. They said goodbye twice on the road because they knew maybe this was going to be the last meeting after the coming battle. So what's interesting here is, let me go back. So Zwingli's dead. So who was going to take over the position of Zwingli at the Gross Munster? So they had candidates like Leo Eude, who was having issues back then, and they had a guy named Schmidt, and then they asked Magander. They all considered that. Now, the magistrates would pick the pastor, right, back then. So none of those were qualified. And then they asked Ecolampadius out of Basel if he would come, and he said no, he wasn't going to take it. So they went to Bullinger, and they put him in the pulpit on, he asked to preach on November 23rd. Zwingli died 3 weeks earlier. So he's in the pulpit, and this was Oswald Myconius, who took over the church in Basel, said this. He was there in attendance. Then, last Sunday, Bullinger thundered out such a sermon that many believed that Zwingli was not dead, but like a phoenix, he was raised again to life. So they say the sermon awakened the city, and then on December 9th, they called Bullinger. They called Bullinger to take the position of Zwingli. All right. So he accepted the call on the 27th. So then they gave Bullinger the responsibility for schools. So here's the 3 schools that they had. The prophecy, which we'll get into, which was called the Carolinum, was the minister school. Then the Gross Munster school was for the upper class Latin school. Then the Frauminster was across the river, was for the lower class school. So Bullinger was put in charge of it. Okay. So this is interesting. This is the Carolinum. Now, a lot of people don't know this. You can see the old picture. You see Bullinger's home on the left with the bay windows. In German, it's called an Ecker. And you see his door. That's where he lived. So the church was across the street. And the building to the left of the church is the old convent, the cloister for the monks, right? 1525 is when this school opened. So Calvin and Beza's Geneva Academy was 1559. So 34 years before the academy there, Zwingli and Bullinger had their theological institute here. We're going to get into the professors in a minute. So here's the thing in Switzerland. You had 3 main academies. All we hear about is the one in Geneva, 1559. And so Calvin died in 1564. So Calvin taught there only for 5 years. The school in Geneva was really Beza's. Beza was the principal, and he's a very competent man, a successor of Calvin. So for years later, he basically ran the school. Now, what's interesting is, going back a little further, Pierre Viret had an academy in Lausanne in 1536, and he was there for 23 years. Beza was his principal at the academy in Lausanne for 9 years. Then Beza left in 1558 to be with Calvin in Geneva. So in Viret's school, they had at times over 1,000 students, up to 900 to 1,000 students. Not all of them were theological students. Many of them were. So the guys that wrote the Heidelberg Catechism, Guido de Brès, who wrote the Belgic, all were at Viré's school. Then, when the Bernese lords kicked Viré out of Lausanne, he went to Geneva, and he took 5 of his main professors from the Lausanne Academy to Geneva. Thus, with the 5 professors, Viré, Calvin, and Beza, they had the faculty. So it was really Viré's school that moved to Geneva. So so when you talk about theological institutes, the key is not the reputation or the grounds of the building. The key is the faculty. So in 1525, this was the first Reformed seminary. So these are the professors there. This was an all-star class, and I'll get into this in a minute, of men that taught at Bullinger and Zwingli's Carolinum, the Theological Institute. This cast, Geneva and Lausanne could not compare to the quality of the men here. So you had Zwingli, Bullinger, obviously. This is interesting. Peter Martyr Vermigli was the Florentine reformer that had to leave Italy. And he came to Zurich. Bullinger set him up to go to Strasbourg. He ended up in England. He helped Cranmer on the 39 Articles. He was just extremely astute theologically. He was asked twice and given a opportunity to teach at the Geneva Academy, and he said no, and he waited till a position opened up in Zurich, and he took the one in Zurich. Conrad Pelikan, he was involved with, he taught, I think, New Testament, very important figure. Bibliander, another very important theologian. He did more linguistics. Leo Eudes, who had the church at St. Peter's across the Lamont River, was also teaching theology. You have Rudolf Gualter, who was Zwingli's son-in-law that took over the church when Bullinger died. So, and then Conrad Gessner is very interesting. He was a botanist, a naturalist, and his works were so good, they were studying these, 200, 300 years later. And he taught there. Ludwig Ladover was Bullinger's son-in-law, taught New Testament. Magander Wolf, Simler is very important here. And then here's some of the other ones. So this was really an all-star class, and men came from all over to teach there. So not many people really even know of this. Now, here's interesting. The Zurich Bible, some of the men at the Theological Institute were involved, and Bullinger somewhat oversaw it, even though he didn't put his name on it. Leo Eudes, Corporan, and some of the other men put this Bible together. The Zurichers put a Bible together 4 years before Luther's Bible was in Germany. And the Zurich Bible never got a lot of use because Luther's language was High German and went everywhere. And there's a different German dialect for the Swiss. So it wasn't as much used except in the immediate Switzerland area. Froschauer, the great printer at Zurich, had this beautiful Bible in 1580. He had like 1,000 engravings in it, 100 engravings in it. Okay, so the first Bible, German Bible, was really in Zurich. So let me go back here. So let's talk about, with the time I've got, it's not much, the Bullinger's character, his pastorate, and his relationship with Calvin. So this is his character. He refused to wear the clerical uniform, no gown. He had no use for academic titles. There was a story of a German VP came to Zurich, and the magistrates wanted to show off their great preacher, and the Germans there, and Bullinger, realizing his audience, starts dumbing down his language because of the peasants in the audience. And the VP comes in, why did you talk like that? And he says, did you not see who was there? Did you not see they were listening to me? So he didn't care. He was called an antistes. The gentleman at the bookstore told me that Bullinger and Zwingli were an antistes. I said, what is that? He says, well, that's the it's like almost the bishop of Zurich in the Protestant term way there. So it's the chief senior pastor, and it's an honorary title, and he never used that in any of his letters. He signed his letters the servant of the Church of Zurich, and he refused foreign money. And an interesting story, right after he took the pastorate, the magistrates asked him if he would swear allegiance to them, and he said no. And then he said, I'll give you my resignation. And so the magistrates had him leave the room, and they met for 5 hours of discussion. They called him back in and said, no, you can keep your pastorate. They couldn't afford to lose him. What's interesting, after Zwingli died, he had calls from Appenzell and from Bern. Howler, his friend, the reformer in Bern, said, "You can come here and you'll be the great minister of the church." And he waited, which was really something good. Okay, for him. His pastorate, in 1529, he was at Capelle, I believe, and the magistrates asked Bullinger to go to Marburg with Zwingli and Ertl and Padius to discuss the Lord's Supper controversy with Luther. And Bullinger says, "No, I don't want to leave my people, and I've got to take care of my pastoral duties, and I don't want to go." It's like, if I'm Bullinger, listen, people, give me 2 weeks. I'll be right back. I got to go see Luther, right? And he refused to do it. Calvin and Farel got kicked out of Geneva in 1538, and his best years that he would say, he was in Strasbourg for 3 years. And for the first 7 or 8 months, Calvin and Butzer were off gallivanting all throughout Germany, going to conferences and meeting with Melanchthon and all that. Bullinger finds out, and he writes Butzer, and he says, "Martin," he says, "if you think you're going to spend time with the Germans and the Germans are going to end up liking us Swiss, forget it. It's not going to happen. Just get back to your people. They need they need the pastors back there." So he's very pastoral. The students talked about his time in Bullinger's house of fellowship and teaching, and after his death, there was just many stories of the wonderful time they had with Bullinger. He was unusual. He was a blend of a consummate pastor and a theologian, and that doesn't happen. It doesn't even happen in the world we live in today. Some men are gifted in the pulpit and gifted theologically, and others are more pastoral. We've all seen it. He was the perfect blend. Farel was not. Calvin was not a natural pastor. He was a tremendous theologian, but Bullinger had that blend. Calvin's relationship with Bullinger, it was very good. Now that term is very important because that term did not apply to the other Swiss German ministers, reformers, and magistrates. They all had issues with Calvin because of his personality. He had a short fuse, and he admitted it. He could be abrasive at times. He was very rigid and dogmatic. So the personality did not meet really good with the other Swiss. So, except Bullinger. Bullinger looked through Calvin's personality, and he saw the brilliant theological mind. And he knew what that benefit would be for the church in the present and the church in the future. He would write letters to Bullinger. There's 300 letters between Bullinger and Calvin. He would write letters to Bullinger, and he would say, "My dear brother, Master Calvin." It was just the sweetest. These letters are just so worth reading, and we're not going to have time to get into some of them. But he sent a letter. The issue with the Genevans was Bullinger sends a letter to Beza. I don't know if Calvin was alive. And he says, "The Genevans sweep with an iron broom." And there's just stories on all that. The Swiss Germans were just a little different on the application of the faith and things of that nature. So this is, I think, what have I got? I got 2 minutes left. And this is the Consensus Tigurianus. So in 1548, you remember we talked about last time I was here, there was issues with the Swiss and Luther and the Lutherans over the Lord's Supper. It was a major issue in the time. It's really not today, but back then it was. In 1548, Farel told Calvin, put together a paper on all the Swiss could agree with on the Lord's Supper so we could have a doctrinal statement and publish it. So Calvin did it. Farel couldn't do it. He didn't have a theological mind. So Calvin put together 24 articles. He sent the articles to Bullinger. Bullinger sends them back with corrections. They go back and forth. Then one day, Calvin writes Bullinger and says, "Farel and I want to visit you. We got to do the final work out of this thing." So the postal service was a little late on the letter getting there. So Farel says to Calvin, "Let's go visit Bullinger," and they're pretty far apart. So Farel, before they go, Calvin has to get permission from the magistrates. So he went to the magistrates, and my mother would say that he did a little fib. He told the magistrates that Farrell and I want to go see Bullinger and discuss the international relations with and how we're handling the French refugees. Well, they might have talked about it for 2 minutes, but that wasn't the subject at hand. So the magistrate said, yes, go ahead and go. So knock, knock, surprise, surprise, we're at Bullinger's door. What are you guys doing here? I sent the letter. Well, we never got it. So Calvin says in his notes that, and this is really important, they worked in 2 hours, they worked out the final agreement. And Calvin had to do more adjustments off of Bullinger's counsel. And then Bullinger sent it to the other ministers for a few minor adjustments, and then they had the Consensus Tigurianus of 1549, very important document in our history. Now, if you notice that, they had to label it the Consensus of Zurich for the other Swiss churches to accept it. If they would have put the Consensus of Geneva, it wouldn't have gone anywhere. It's just how it was back then. So, and Bullinger gave Calvin a lot of credit for it because Calvin put it together. And so there's an account here. Anyway, two more things, and I'll be done. But they, Myconius in Basel and Haller in Bern were very upset they were not included in deliberations. And looking back, they really should have been. So it ended up being published in 1550, a year or so later. And Schaff says every place but Bern accepted it. It went over England and France. It was accepted as a Reformed position. When they published it, Melanchthon said, Melanchthon took over from Luther, right? Now I finally understand the Swiss position, and I'll never speak against the Swiss again. The great Presbyterian historian Thomas Lindsay, I've got some of his books, said this: the Consensus Tigurianus is still Calvin's thought expressed in Zwinglian terms. So it's great when you see the ministers not being rivals but working together for the common good. One thing when I put the books up is years ago I read where Schaff said that when Bullinger died, it was a public calamity in England. And I'm thinking, what? Bullinger is in Zurich, England's over here, and we found out that Bullinger was running the English Reformation out of Zurich. I mean, and there's just hundreds and hundreds of letters with the kings, the queens, all the Archbishop of Canterbury. So here's what we say about the Anglican Church. In practice, it's Arminian. In liturgy, it's Catholic, right? You've been in the Anglican Church with the high altar, the whole deal. But in theology, it's Reformed, mostly because of Bullinger.